Recovery from Anything features real stories that some listeners might find distressing. Check the show notes for specific content warnings and information on support services.
It was kind of like that I had this thing going on that I couldn't tell anyone, but everyone kind of knew that something was going on. I just felt like there was just always something wrong with me, and I was just like a little girl kind of trying to navigate through that.
Welcome to Recovery from Anything. I'm your host, Abby Feltham. If you've listened to this podcast before, you'll know that it's a storytelling platform. We bring you, and by we, I mean me, I'm literally the only person on the team, incredible true stories of survival and recovery, told by the people who lived them. Their stories, their voices. I often, in the intro or during brief interludes, relate my experiences to the stories told in each episode. But I'm not going to do that this week. I don't want to take up any space. I just want you to hear this remarkable story of recovery from childhood sexual abuse. Here's Chloe.
I grew up in the northeast England. I grew up in Middlesbrough. Quite small, bit deprived, but a lot of soul. I have a lot of siblings. I've got 4 brothers and a sister. A lot of them were more grown up. My eldest sibling, she's 14 years older than me. Really, really close though. Really close. They just used to say I was just an absolute maniac. They just described me as just this lunatic, really, just running around. I always had like a really short, blunt bob, and my hair was really thick, so I looked like, just had a big semicircle around my head. But I was also really shy. I loved school. I was very athletic. I really loved like science and things like that. I wanted to be a scientist when I was a kid, so I was a bit of a nerd. I still do, loved reading, being creative, things like that. I don't actually know my biological dad, but my mum got remarried to my stepdad. She was a really vulnerable mum, single mum too. At that time, 4 children. We were not close. We didn't really have a mother-daughter relationship. And that was mostly because of the relationship that she had with my stepdad, which was actually my abuser that I lived in the home with. In many ways, she was also abused within that abuse circle. So she kind of went by his decisions, which would often pertain to harming me further. So it was a real opportunistic pairing for him to come into her life at that time, which I know now is obviously was the goal of it. I wouldn't say they've had a great relationship at all. Both of them were drinking really heavily at the time. He was an alcoholic. I know that now, but she was also using alcohol a lot at the time. So again, that comes with different things like neglect, physical neglect, ignoring our needs, doctors, dentists, things of that nature that comes with it. So it was just a real disassociation from me. They would kind of fight and argue, and I would sit at the top of the stairs and I'd be cheering my mum on. I'd be go on, mum. And then the next day it'd be normal. And it was that kind of cycle of, using alcohol, then, having that heightened fight in the evening, and then the next day, nothing had happened. Repeat. I was a baby, basically, when he first came into the picture. When I grew up, he was like my dad, really. I used to call him dad. He would do dad things, We used to play video games together. My mum played games, but not video games, getting the Nintendo 64 and stuff like that. We'd get the new Grand Theft Auto together, get the new Final Fantasy together. We'd just really have good times in a way. So those are the things that kind of stick out, because I think that was a real entry point to me, because I loved stuff like that. He knew I loved it, so that's how he would spend time with me.
You kind of bond with him over in that time.
Yeah, I guess we did. It's a really funny one because, this is a person who is it's my dad. So it has that dad relationship to it. it's a person in your life that you have to respect as a parent, really, regardless of anything else that's going on, which I think made it even more confusing for me, really, as a child to, see him as a parent. But I did for a long time. I did. So it was around 6, really, that relationship started to change. It happens like, most cases of things like this, very gradually. That kind of started in like a routine. There was, certain events of like a sexual nature that would happen at a certain time, when mum would go to bed. Naturally, that's when I started to change as well with it. I was always like a good girl, I wasn't really like a misbehaviour or anything like that, but I just started to act out. At school, I was connection seeking at school. So I used to love my teachers and things like that, but they would start to notice that I wasn't being like particularly nice to other students, that I wasn't being particularly nice to my little brother, at home. I would be particularly mean to him. Maybe it was because of the connection, because it was his son. I don't know exactly what was, the cause of it, but I just knew that at that time in my life, I just didn't want to be near him at all. It was kind of like that I had this thing going on that I couldn't tell anyone, but everyone kind of knew that something was going on. So it was like, she knows, I know, she knows, he knows, she knows, it was like in the room, but also not. So I just had a lot of my shoulders, I would describe it. And I was just like a little girl kind of trying to navigate through that. I could keep going because I was just floating on this boat of really big emotions every day. But it was so difficult for me to talk to anyone, really, because I couldn't really have friends over. I wouldn't have had friends over either, but I couldn't really engage in a lot of like the normal things that children do because of not just what was going on with my stepdad, but for all of these myriad of other reasons that were also going on at the same time. So it was just like, event after event after event after event. I just felt like there was just always something wrong with me. I would cry a lot at school. If someone was going to ask me a question, I would like have what I would describe as like an anxiety attack. I would be hysterically crying, shaking, always getting taken out of the room. And other kids pick up on that as well. I just felt really low. I felt like a crybaby, really. One of my oldest brothers, he always knew something wasn't right. And because my brothers were older, they moved out like as soon as they could. But when they would come back, they could tell immediately that something wasn't going right. So they would have like lots of physical fights with him. And then eventually that kind of turned into them staying away and not coming back anymore, or at least not for a while. And they had their own issues as well that comes with it, because this was just my part of it. These events had been going on for my siblings for a long time in their own different ways. So they were just, young adults trying to get away from it, but they had a really tied relationship with him. I wouldn't even describe it as a relationship, to be honest. About 14 was the last event of like a sexual nature that I can remember. And it was actually when I was 14 that I told my mum. It sounds really weird, but one day I just realised that I'd been sexually abused, and I was at a friend's house. I remember just saying like, I think I've been like abused all of my life. And I'm like, what? And I was like, and then everything, like floodgates opened. And it's not that I didn't know, it's that I didn't like understand that I'd been abused until that moment. And then I couldn't go home. I wasn't able to go home because I was at my friend's house, and I was like, I'm gonna have to tell her. My mum was really scary, so I couldn't tell her to her face. I texted her what had been going on and how long it had been going on for, and she just texted back saying, okay. And when I come home, and as I opened the door, the last thing I remember seeing him is he had a pile of clothes And I opened the door and I shouted at my mum, and he just said she's upstairs. And that's the last time I ever saw him in the house. I didn't go to the police immediately. Mum had just bought a house with him, and she was tied up in a mortgage, and then suddenly she was a single mum. It was just me and my little brother at the time, but with a big mortgage, and then he'd got caught stealing money at his job, so he got sacked. And then she just had a mortgage with no money, and that's when it just really got really tense between us, because, you know, then it was my fault at that time. You know, it's my fault that we have no money. I can't feed you, I can't do X, Y, and Z. So in a way, it was way worse at that point for me. Those years between 14 and 17 was just absolute hell, because I had choice, but I also had no choice either, you know, because, you know, you're a young teenager, you can't do anything anyway. But at least when I was a child, I kind of had a lot more constraints around me. At that point, my mum kind of just let the leash go, because she couldn't deal with it either, to be fair. It's a hell of a lot to deal with. You know, that's when her drinking really escalated at that time. I went to the police when I was 17. It was my older brother that kind of just came and said, you know, are you gonna like go to the police or anything? And honestly, I genuinely hadn't even thought about it. It hadn't even crossed my mind, because no one kind of advocated for it. I hadn't told services. You know, services weren't aware of anything that was going on. So he was like, I think you should go to the police, and I did. And I secured a conviction when I was 18, which was, it's amazing. He told me to do it when I did, because I was a couple of months before becoming 18. And the difference between a child case and when it turned into an adult, it would have just been night and day. So I don't know what made him tell me to do that at that particular time. It was just a divine moment, really. I would describe it, that he did that when he did. And luckily, yeah, secured a conviction. That was a roller coaster in itself. They'd seized his PC because that had material on, and then he ran, and they found him in a hospital. Because obviously it was historical, I didn't need to go through any sort of examinations or anything like that, but I just did a video recording of my statement, essentially, and then the fact that he had material as well, and he admitted to doing it. And I think that's the nicest thing he's ever done for me, really, because it could have been a hell of a lot worse. And I don't think I would have even pursued it any further, if I'm being honest. At that time, I probably would have had to, you know, leave it, because it was at that age, really, about, you know, later teen years, that the chickens were coming home to roost, like mental health, like gone, behaviours just gone. That's when it really started to go really downhill for me. And I don't think if it had gone any other way, I don't think I would have been able to continue it, honestly. I remember my mum's reaction was, we don't talk about this anymore. And that's when I first approached mental health services, really, for some support, because it was getting really dicey. I'd attempted on my life. My first time was when I was 14, but then it was becoming more frequent in those teen years. And that's when I, you know, really started to consider and access treatment. But I wasn't really in the position for any sort of therapy or anything like that. I wasn't well enough to do anything like CBT or like EMDR. I was absolutely nowhere near anything like that. So I just did a lot of counselling, and to this day, that is the one thing that has really, really helped. And it was still really rocky all the way, I'd say, until I was about 25. It was really rocky, really not well, lots of different medications, lots of different diagnoses, you know, ranging from, you know, BPD to type 2 bipolar disorder, when I know now is the person I am. I know that it was just the result of a lot of horrendous things happening to someone that was really young, and I didn't need all of those things that were given to me. But, you know, this was my experience. When I accessed treatment, that was the thing. Oh, well, Chloe's like this because she's been sexually abused. And that was the end of the story, you know, and now she's got BPD, or now she's got this. And so it was really rocky, but we're in a good position now with mental health services.
Just going back to like when your stepdad was convicted, did they offer you counselling then?
I'd been through school when I was 14 to like a school counsellor, just like an in-house thing, nothing too serious. So I'd had some kind of interactions there. You know, I did kind of reach out and I did vocalise what I was going through. Many points in my life that didn't fall on the correct ears, you know. So I was very like, no, like you've had your chance. I've gave that minor disclosure when I was a child and you didn't do anything with it. So it was only when I was around 18 that I came back to services and things like that, like community mental health nurses, things like that. Fabulous people that really, really supported me a lot. And really, again, like I say, I wasn't really fit for the treatment that they were kind of offering at that time. I just needed help. I didn't want to particularly do any work. I was at that point of illness where I'm really poorly, everything's really bad, and I need you to just take this away from me at this moment, which is obviously not how it works. I didn't want to identify with it either, you know. I didn't want to kind of talk about it with people, and everyone was like really softly spoken and like really nice and things like that. And that wasn't what I was used to at that time. It was difficult for me to engage with the services then. It wasn't the right time. I needed more really kind of like practical support and like how to be human again, really, as opposed to kind of unpicking really complex trauma. So I always dropped out of treatment. You know, I'd have an assessment, maybe go once, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm all right, don't worry. And they'd be like, really? And I'd be like, oh, I'm absolutely fine, don't worry. And then drop out, and then the cycle starts again of, you know, only engaging with services when I was in crisis. I wasn't there for the long haul. I just wanted like that fix and then leave. Obviously not knowing that, you know, none of these things are the fix, but that's just what you do when you're in that position. That's how you go with it. You're just always in crisis. I moved in with my sister when I was about 19, 20. I had a really like rubbish job. It was like a call centre job thing. I was absolutely terrible at it. I'm not a good salesperson, and I was just having a mental health crisis like every day. And my brother was like, you need to like quit and you need to go do something, because like this, how long is this going to go on? And he was right, and he gave me some really hard truths, and I needed to change my behaviour at that time, and he was absolutely right, and I left that job. And then I got a job at a supermarket with, you know, really low wage, a couple of nights a week. I remembered that I love being academic, so I went back to college. Through college, got access to counselling. After college, I went back to university, got access to even more counselling, finished my degree, and then I did my master's, and then I got even more counselling while I was doing that. And then because of that change that I made and just like let go and was like, I need to start at the bottom instead of, you know, jumping to the top. That was it. And I'd like remembered who I was really, and like not all of these other lies. I was like, oh, I actually really like studying, you know, I love reading, and like slowly remembering all of the things that I used to like, because through all of this was the undercurrent of my own substance use as well, kind of having its own layer on it, and you know, alcohol use and cannabis for a lot of years. So it was kind of like letting go of a lot of that and remembering like who I really was. That was the shift. Once I started like doing recovery, was changing my identity. That was the beginning bit, and recovering myself and achieving goals. And then that evolved into me kind of changing my identity in terms of, I used to think of, I was like a victim. I used to use like the victim word on myself, and then turning that to, actually, no, that's not the case. You're not a victim of anything. You're a survivor of this. And as soon as I dropped that V word and turned it to survivor, that was it. It was day and night. I was like, oh my God. I started getting into things like, you know, like reading about post-traumatic growth, things like that. And I was like realizing like that actually, like, I've lived a really crazy life. I'm here. I'm still doing things, and I'm all right. and eventually just working on it bit by bit, doing lots of counselling, absolutely loads of counselling, discovering, all of those little bits that have been locked away. That was it. I don't ever say words like cured, but I honestly don't think about it. Today's probably the first time I've thought about it in such a long time, because I just don't think about it. And when I do, I just think like, that's so wild that happened, but I'm so grateful that happened, because I wouldn't be anything that I am now if I hadn't survived everything that I've been through. It gives you like my compassion, my drive, my ridiculous, terrible, dark sense of humour, which is like my biggest asset. None of those things would exist if I hadn't survived all of those things. And now I'm in a position where I can help other people as well. And that's just like the cherry on the cake of it all, honestly. I'm an alcohol and non-opiate caseworker, which means I'm helping people coordinate their own recovery through one-to-one meetings, involvement with other agencies, using things I use a lot of sort of like motivational interviewing, other psychosocial interventions, all the way down to the most practical help that you can offer. And it's absolutely unbelievable. Honestly, I didn't think that jobs like this existed, truly. It wasn't even on my radar. I just went for it and I thought, oh gosh, there's no way I can do this. And then it turns out that I can use everything that I've been through with other people's recovery. Obviously not in detail, but things don't shock me ever. And that's like a real big thing that's helped me with this, and it helps to really support people, and it just feels amazing to do it as well, and get really positive outcomes for people. Families reunited, unbelievable things happening between 9 till 5 and on a Monday to Friday. It's just mind blowing, honestly. It really is. It's just so humbling, honestly, and it's just such an honour to be inside of people's journeys of their own recovery, helping them navigate, the highs, the lows, talking about the specifics of it, what it looks like, doing, everything that you can do, and all the other things as well outside of the life. I do really amazing groups, like we've got allotment groups, gym groups, AA meetings, smart recovery meetings, all of the different tools that are really going to amplify recovery, access to rehabs, access to detoxes, just everything under the sun with recovery. Forgiveness is another thing that set me free. The forgiveness of all of these people that hurt me, even to my stepdad, forgiveness to him. I've heard about his life recently, and it's horrendous. He's on the sex offenders list. He's not allowed to go certain places. He's not allowed to phone. He's not allowed any of these things, and he just sits and gambles all day and like machines, and it's like a hollow existence, and that doesn't even particularly make me happy. But I think everyone is different, because that's the forgiveness is like a really big word to apply to these situations, and that doesn't mean forgiving people for their actions. It means forgiving them for the harms that they've done, and giving them accountability as well.
What was that process like forgiving your mum?
It was long, because in some ways I held her to a higher account than I did him, because that was my mum, and she's supposed to protect me and look after me and nurture me and do all of the things that my mum did, and she didn't do any of those things. But my mum isn't in the greatest of health, and I thought, I'm going to lose her, as everyone will, and I'm not going to have the opportunity to really talk about what it felt like for me. And as difficult as it was, that was one of the best things that it did as well. It doesn't make it okay, but it means that I have another person to call, I have another person to speak to. So that's something that I'm really glad that I was able to capture in all of it. And it took a very, very long time for me to have a relationship with my mum. At first I had like the screaming matches, that didn't work. The talking ones, it didn't work, and it eventually just come down to me knowing that even if this is a one-sided forgiveness, it's still one that's going to set me free. And at the end of the day, that's what I need to do. And it wasn't pretty at all. And I did not, I went into it thinking I'm going to 100% keep my cool here and I'm going to say exactly what I mean first time. And I absolutely did nothing of those things. I was screaming, bawling, and she didn't even know what on earth I was talking about, because this is all the way that I was feeling, and she didn't understand that. So yeah, I had to really sort of, have that conversation and tell her how I feel. And also the biggest part is know that it doesn't matter what she says about it either, because I can't stop her autonomy. I can't stop her being a human as well, because she's made mistakes. And she was put in a really difficult position that I'm not sure what I would do. I'm not sure what any people would do with all of those factors combined. You look at it from the outside and think, oh, well, that was the easy option, when honestly, her life has not been picture perfect. She's had a lot of things to deal with and contend with. And that's why I give her so much grace, because it's just like levels of, trauma that people go through, and that makes their decisions not come out the way that we would think they should. Coming to terms with her role in abuse, the decisions that she's made, and then also adding some, humility to it, and kind of thinking of it as nobody's perfect, and these situations are really difficult to navigate. So applying all of that to the relationship that I have with my mum, and now we have a fantastic relationship because of all of that work. And all of those games that I played with my stepdad for a long time, I couldn't play them, and now I play them all the time. And I take ownership of things that were, taken off me. I make them authentically my own now, and I don't allow anyone to disturb that peace. Just enjoying my job, I'm enjoying my life. I'm working on getting married next year. He's absolutely stunning. I've known him since I was 18, and then we rekindled just last year. We'd been in touch for 10 years. He went away, and we went abroad and he did his thing. I stayed home and attempted to do my thing. And then we've just come back together at the right time. He's always known my story. He's always known exactly who I was, and he's always been such a big cheerleader for me and such a huge support. And it just even more than that, he's just like, he's my best friend. He's the funniest person in the world. He's the father to my 2 cat children, he's a great cook, the list goes on and on. He's an absolute diamond, he really is.
What does recovery mean to you?
It means to become myself again, but not the same self, a new self that is different in many ways, same in many ways, but to have access to that person and to live who I authentically am, regardless of what's happened. That's what it means.
You've been listening to Recovery from Anything. I'm your host, Abby Feltham. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate and review the show, and join the community on Instagram @Recovery from Anything. You can find out more about this week's storyteller or submit a story of your own on our website, recoveryfromanything.com. Thank you for listening.